Okay, buckle up. This is going to be a long ride, a deep dive into the heart of a town wrestling with its demons. I'm going to tell you a story about Jasmine Cole, a father's unwavering love, and a town on the brink of transformation. It's a story of power, prejudice, and the long, hard fight for justice. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the gas station parking lot, the kind of light that makes everything look a little more cinematic, a little more significant. Jasmine Cole, all of 17, with her head full of dreams and her earbuds blasting the latest Lizzo track, wasn't thinking about any of that. She was just trying to grab a soda to break up the monotony of the drive back home with her dad. Anthony Reed, her father, leaned against their aging Ford Explorer, a subtle tension etched into his face. He was a man of routine, of schedules. He was thinking about the chicken he promised to grill for dinner, the paperwork piling up on his desk, and the meeting he had tomorrow with the city council. It was a new job, a big job. He'd just been sworn in as the new chief of police for the town of Havenwood. A town with a history, a town with secrets, a town that, frankly, needed a shake-up. Jasmine emerged from the convenience store, scrolling through Instagram with one hand and clutching a bottle of cherry soda in the other. It was a perfectly ordinary scene, the kind that plays out 1,000 times a day in small-town America. But ordinary was about to shatter. She bumped into him. Not a violent collision, just a brush of shoulders, a momentary disruption of personal space. But it was enough. Watch where you're going. The voice was sharp, laced with an authority that felt disproportionate to the minor infraction. Jasmine looked up, startled. Officer Greg Mathers. Mid-40s, built like a brick, with a square jaw and eyes that seemed to bore right through you. He was the kind of cop who exuded an aura of control, the kind who believed he was the law. He was also a cop with a reputation whispered about in hushed tones around the precinct. A reputation for being aggressive. Sorry, Jasmine mumbled. Taking a step back. She'd learned young that apologies were often the easiest way to defuse a situation, especially when dealing with authority figures. Mathers didn't move. His gaze lingered on her, assessing, calculating. You got an attitude? Jasmine hesitated. That's what cops want. Her mind screamed. Say the right thing. No, sir. The sir was a carefully constructed shield, a layer of deference designed to deflect any potential aggression. Mathers exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. It was a look that made her skin crawl, a look that felt invasive, disrespectful. What's in your pockets? Jasmine blinked, confused. Excuse me, you deaf? I said, empty your pockets. His voice was rising now, the edge of impatience creeping in. Her stomach tightened. This was escalating. I just came out of the store. I have my receipt. Mathers took a step closer, his presence looming. I didn't ask for your receipt. Empty your pockets. Anthony, who had been watching from the car, his internal alarm bells starting to ring, finally reacted. He closed the car door and walked towards them. What's going on? His voice was calm, but there was an underlying steel in his tone. He trusted his daughter. If he ever saw her steal something, he would take her home and punish her himself. Mathers didn't even glance at him. His focus remained locked on Jasmine. She's been stealing. Jasmine's face twisted in disbelief. I just told you, watch your tone, Mathers interrupted, his voice now a low growl. It was the sound that turned minor misunderstandings into handcuff moments. Anthony stepped forward, placing himself between Mathers and Jasmine. She's not stealing, Mathers finally acknowledged him, but his expression was dismissive. Sir, I'm asking your daughter to comply with a lawful order. Anthony's patience was wearing thin. That's not an order. That's harassment. Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I have my receipt right here, she said, reaching into her jacket pocket, and that's when it happened. Mathers moved with shocking speed. His fist a blur of motion. There was a sickening crack, the sound of bone meeting skin, and Jasmine crumpled to the pavement. The world went silent, the soda bottle rolled away, spilling its syrupy contents onto the asphalt. A woman gasped. A man muttered, "Oh my God," Jasmine's mind reeled. A dull ringing filled her ears, drowning out the sounds of the parking lot. Pain pulsed in her jaw, sharp and immediate. She tasted blood, everything hung suspended in that stretched-out, agonizing second. Nobody moved. Then, Anthony's voice cut through the silence, a voice raw with fury. "Put your hands behind your back," Mathers smirked, still standing over Jasmine. "Or what?" Anthony reached into his pocket. His movements deliberate, controlled. He pulled out his badge, the gold shield glinting in the fading sunlight. The new chief of police. The smirk vanished from Mathers' face. His eyes widened, his jaw slackened. The cogs in his brain were visibly grinding, trying to process the impossible, and just like that, the power dynamic shifted. The gas station parking lot, once filled with the mundane sounds of idling engines and chattering voices, was now a frozen tableau of disbelief. The weight of a dozen camera phones, recording the scene from every angle, pressed down on Mathers. Anthony stood firm, his badge held loosely in his hand. He knew the power of optics, the power of image. But it wasn't about showmanship. It was about principle. "Turn around," he said, his voice cold and even. Mathers swallowed hard. "Chief, aye, turn around." There was no yelling, no theatrics, just the unwavering authority of a man who had seen too much injustice in his life. Mathers' eyes darted around the lot, searching for an escape route, an ally, backup. But there was none. His patrol car sat empty. The bystanders were filming, but no one was about to step in to defend him. He was alone. Jasmine was still on the ground, propped up on one elbow. Her lip was split and swelling, her eyes bright with shock and pain. She looked at her father, her expression a mix of disbelief and burgeoning pride. She had never seen him like this, not angry, not emotional, just resolved. Mathers exhaled heavily, his hands twitching at his sides. "Look, Chief, let's talk." Anthony moved with lightning speed. He grabbed Mathers' wrist, spun him around, and slammed his arms behind his back, the same way Mathers had done to countless others before. The same grip, the same pressure, the same lack of hesitation. Mathers grunted. "This is ridiculous. You can't just, you assaulted a minor," Anthony said, his voice flat. "And you're about to find out what happens next." The cuffs clicked, a crisp, final sound that echoed through the parking lot. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Someone cheered. Another person muttered, "About damn time." Jasmine finally managed to pull herself up, her movements slow and unsteady. Her face burned, not just from the pain, but from the humiliation. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, staring at the smear of red. Anthony turned to her, his eyes softening, just slightly. "You good?" Jasmine wanted to say something, anything, but her throat felt tight. She just gave a small, barely perceptible nod. Anthony turned back to Mathers. "You want to explain why you punched my daughter in the face?" Mathers scoffed, his voice lower now, less sure. "I thought she was reaching for something. For what?" Anthony shot back. "A gun? A weapon? Or maybe just a receipt?" Mathers clenched his jaw. "I was acting in the interest of safety." Anthony stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Mathers could hear. "And whose safety was at risk?" "Yours." "Because a 17-year-old girl was reaching into her pocket." Silence. Anthony exhaled slowly, adjusting his grip on Mathers' cuffs. "You're done." Mathers let out a breathy chuckle, like he still had a card to play. "Come on, Chief, we don't have to do this here. Let's handle this in-house." Anthony let the words hang in the air for a second, then leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "There is no we. Mathers swallowed hard. Anthony straightened, scanning the crowd, the phones, the faces. He knew how this worked. He knew how fast the city would react, how quickly the department would scramble. The story had already left this parking lot, carried on the digital winds of social media. But the real fight was just beginning. The weight of the moment settled in, heavy as the thick air before a storm. Mathers stood there, arms restrained behind his back, the cold steel of the handcuffs digging into his skin. His breathing was shallow, uneven, the breathing of a man realizing he'd finally run out of luck. Anthony tightened his grip on the cuffs. He could feel Mathers resisting, not outright fighting, but his body tensed, coiled like a spring. It was a strange reversal of power. For years, Mathers had been the one standing over people, using intimidation as his weapon. Now, he was just another man in cuffs, and he didn't know how to handle it. Anthony spoke, his voice low and steady, his words carrying the weight of undeniable truth. "You're under arrest for assaulting a minor," Mathers jerked in his grasp. "This is a mistake," Anthony ignored him. "You have the right to remain silent," Mathers' face twisted. "Chief, come on, you're really gonna, you have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one, the court will provide you with, Jesus Christ, Anthony." Mathers' voice cracked, the bravado slipping for the first time. He looked scared. Anthony finished the Miranda warning without breaking eye contact. His grip didn't loosen. There were no favors here. The crowd had grown larger, more people gathering, stepping closer but keeping their distance. Some recorded, some whispered to each other, some just stared, taking in the moment. One man in the front shook his head. "All these years, this dude been out here treating people like dirt." A woman next to him folded her arms. "Guess he finally picked the wrong one." Jasmine leaned against the car, now pressing an ice-cold soda bottle to the side of her swollen face. Her lips stung every time she swallowed, but she wasn't thinking about the pain. She was thinking about everything that had led up to this. She had seen videos like this before, black men and women pinned to the ground, handcuffed, mistreated. She'd grown up knowing the rules: keep your hands visible, don't talk back, be polite, don't give them an excuse. She had followed all of them. And she still got punched. Her father glanced at her, his eyes searching, unreadable. She knew what he was asking: "Are you okay?" Not just physically, but really okay. She swallowed and nodded, not because she was okay, but because she refused to give Mathers any more power over her. Anthony turned back to his officers. "His department now. Take him in." Two officers moved in, grabbing Mathers by the arms. His jaw clenched, his face red with a mix of anger and embarrassment. "You're making a damn mistake," he muttered under his breath as they led him toward a patrol car. Anthony didn't respond, because he knew the truth. The only mistake would have been letting this slide. Mathers' radio crackled as he was shoved into the back seat. The patrol car door slammed shut, a final punctuation mark on his downfall, but Anthony knew better than to think it was over. Because the real battle wasn't just about one bad cop. It was about what happened next. The station was buzzing by the time Anthony and Jasmine arrived. Officers stood in clusters, whispering, some glancing at him with wide eyes, others avoiding his gaze entirely. It was one thing to hear about what happened, it was another to watch one of their own being dragged through the doors in handcuffs. Mathers sat in the booking area, his face tight with barely contained fury. He hadn't said much since being stuffed into the patrol car, but his silence was louder than words. Anthony could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken challenge hanging in the air. Some of these officers had worked with Mathers for years. Some of them probably agreed with him. They were waiting to see what kind of chief Anthony would be. He wasn't about to keep them guessing. He walked toward the front desk, where a younger officer, Lopez, sat looking between him and Mathers like he was caught in the middle of something way above his pay grade. "Get him processed," Anthony said, his voice level. Lopez hesitated, glancing toward the other officers. "Chief, are you sure we?" Anthony cut him off with a look. "Do your job." Lopez swallowed and nodded, pushing the necessary paperwork forward. Mathers glared at Anthony as his fingerprints were taken, his lip curled. "You think this is going to stick?" Anthony didn't respond. He knew how this worked. Mathers wasn't scared of a few charges. He was betting on the system to protect him. He was betting that the union would step in. That the department would hesitate, that people would forget, But Anthony wasn't about to let that happen. Jasmine stood near the entrance, arms crossed, watching everything unfold. Her cheek was still swollen, the bruising darkening under the fluorescent lights. Every now and then, she caught an officer looking at her, not out of concern, but curiosity. She wasn't supposed to be here. Black girls weren't supposed to be in police stations unless they were in trouble, but she wasn't here as a suspect. She was here as a witness. The door to the station swung open, and Anthony didn't need to turn around to know who it was, the mayor, James Calloway. He had the posture of a man who didn't like surprises. His suit was crisp, his hair neatly combed, but there was a tightness in his expression that told Anthony exactly what this visit was about. "We need to talk," Calloway said. Anthony nodded once. "My office." They walked past the stairs, past the murmurs, into a space where the walls wouldn't have ears. The moment the door shut, Calloway's polished demeanor cracked. "Do you have any idea how many calls I've gotten today?" he hissed. Anthony leaned against his desk. "Let me guess. Half want Mathers fired immediately, the other half want me gone," Calloway exhaled sharply. "You already know how this works. This department protects its own. You think just because you got a badge you can walk in and start making arrests like this won't blow back on you?" Anthony's face remained unreadable. "He hit my daughter." Calloway hesitated. Anthony leaned forward. "And you're asking me if I regret arresting him?" Calloway shook his head, rubbing his temples. "The union's already involved. His lawyer's already making noise about excessive force and false arrest. And don't think for a second the media won't twist this into something else." Anthony crossed his arms. "They can twist it however they want. The video speaks for itself," the mayor sighed. "This town doesn't like change, Anthony." Anthony met his gaze, unwavering. "Then it's about to get uncomfortable." Calloway stared at him for a long moment, sizing him up, testing his resolve. Then he exhaled and nodded slowly. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see where this goes." But Anthony already knew where it was going, straight through the heart of a system that wasn't ready for someone like him. The next morning, the town woke up to headlines that couldn't be ignored. Police chief arrests officer for assaulting teenager. Gas station incident sparks outrage, calls for police reform intensify. The video had gone viral overnight. News stations picked it up. Social media tore into Mathers, his history, his record, every complaint that had been filed against him but never stuck. The floodgates had opened. Jasmine sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. Her name wasn't in the articles, but she knew they were talking about her. She was the teen victim, the black minor assaulted by a police officer. She exhaled sharply, locking her screen. "This is insane." Across from her, Anthony sipped his coffee, the morning paper folded on the table. He wasn't smiling, because he knew what came next. The pushback, the people who would say Mathers was just doing his job, the ones who would turn Jasmine into the problem instead of the victim. They always did. His phone rang. It was his deputy. He answered, his voice neutral. "Chief, Mathers made bail." "He's already out." Anthony expected that. Mathers had too many connections, too many people willing to throw money at a problem if it meant keeping things quiet. But this wasn't going to be quiet. His deputy hesitated. "And he's threatening to sue." Anthony almost laughed. Of course he was. Of course, a man like Mathers would play the victim the moment the tables turned. Jasmine's fingers curled into her hoodie sleeves. "Are you serious?" Anthony nodded slowly, rubbing his temple. "Yeah, he's serious. The lawsuit was just a tactic, a desperate attempt to turn the conversation away from what he did. It wouldn't hold up. The video was clear as day, but it was still a fight, and this was never just about Mathers. The police union had already stepped in, calling his arrest an overreaction. Some officers in the department had already started picking sides. The mayor was playing it carefully, trying to be diplomatic, trying to keep things from boiling over, but Anthony wasn't here to play politics. He was here to fix a system that had been broken long before he arrived. And fixing things, it made people uncomfortable. Jasmine studied him for a long moment. "Are they going to try to push you out?" Anthony exhaled. "They'll try, but you're not leaving." Her eyes met his, steady. Unwavering, not a chance, because Mathers wasn't just one bad cop. He was a symptom of something bigger, and Anthony was just getting started. The backlash came fast and furious. Threats, smears, a campaign to discredit him, the usual playbook when someone dared to challenge the system. Some officers in the department had gone silent around him, others had made it clear where they stood with Mathers. It didn't surprise Anthony. What did surprise him was how loud the town had become. Protests erupted outside the station, not just against Mathers, but against every officer who had protected men like him. People were tired of hearing the same stories, tired of watching the same cycles repeat. Anthony stood at his office window, looking down at the crowd. Jasmine was somewhere in there. He hadn't tried to stop her from going. She deserved to be there. The door to his office swung open. "Mayor Calloway again. You made this a lot bigger than it needed to be," Calloway said without preamble. Anthony turned slowly, arching a brow. "I made it bigger," Calloway sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You could have handled this differently." Internally. Anthony repeated, his voice flat. Like every other time Mathers harassed someone and walked away untouched, Calloway didn't answer. Anthony stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "You think this is about me? I could lose my job tomorrow and this wouldn't stop. People are done being polite about injustice. You might not like the noise, but the silence is what got us here." Calloway exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. "The police union is pressuring the city council. They want Mathers reinstated." Anthony shook his head, laughing under his breath. "Not happening. He's got powerful people backing him." "Good," Anthony said. "Because so do I." He turned back toward the window, watching the protesters chant. His daughter's name, Jasmine Cole. Not victim, not unidentified black teenager. Her name, loud and clear. She had been knocked down, but she got back up. Just like this town would. Just like Anthony would, Calloway sighed. Rubbing his temples. "You're really not backing down, are you?" Anthony turned, meeting his gaze. "Not now. Not ever, because if this town was about to change, somebody had to lead the way." And he was ready. The showdown came at the city council meeting. The room was packed, the air thick with tension. Protesters lined the streets outside, their chants echoing through the open windows. The police union lawyer, a slick, well-groomed man named Mr. Davies, presented Mathers as a dedicated officer, a victim of political overreach. He argued that Mathers had acted in good faith, that he had a right to defend himself, that Jasmine Cole was somehow responsible for what happened to her. Davies painted a picture of a town spiraling out of control, a police force undermined by a rogue chief, a community divided by racial tensions. He demanded that Mathers be reinstated immediately and that Anthony Reed be removed from his position. The council members listened, their faces a mixture of apprehension and calculation. They were politicians, after all, and their primary concern was self-preservation. Then, it was Anthony's turn to speak. He stood at the podium, his posture calm, his voice steady. He didn't yell, he didn't grandstand, he didn't play the victim. He simply laid out the facts, clearly and concisely. He showed the video, the unedited version, frame by frame. He pointed out Mathers' aggressive behavior, his escalation of the situation, his use of excessive force. He reminded the council members of Mathers' history of complaints, the patterns of abuse that had been ignored for too long. Then, he spoke about Jasmine. He spoke about her dreams, her ambitions, her inherent goodness. He spoke about the fear that she, and countless other young black people, lived with every day, the fear of being targeted, harassed, brutalized by those who were supposed to protect them. He spoke about the broken system, the code of silence, the culture of impunity that allowed officers like Mathers to operate with impunity. This isn't just about one officer. He said, his voice resonating with conviction. This is about the kind of town we want to be. A town where everyone is treated with respect, where justice is blind, where the law applies equally to all. Or a town where power trumps principle, where some people are more equal than others, where the cycle of abuse continues unchecked. He paused, looking directly at the council members. The choice is yours. The room was silent, the tension palpable. The council members shifted in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Then, Councilwoman Ramirez spoke. She was a woman of color, a longtime advocate for social justice. Her voice was trembling, but her words were firm. I've seen enough. She said. I've heard enough. I move that we uphold Chief Reed's decision to terminate Officer Mather's employment. The room erupted. Protesters cheered outside. The police union lawyer sputtered in protest. The other council members looked at each other, weighing their options. One by one, they began to vote. It was close, nail-bitingly close. But in the end, the vote was in Anthony's favor. Mathers would not be reinstated, but even as the crowd outside erupted in celebration, Anthony knew that the fight was far from over. This was just one battle, one victory in a long and arduous war. The system was still broken. The culture still needed to change. And there was still much work to be done. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The Mathers case went to trial. The video was played again and again. Witnesses testified. The defense argued that Mathers had acted in self-defense, that Jasmine was somehow responsible for her own assault, but the jury saw through the lies. They convicted Mathers on charges of assault and battery. He was sentenced to prison. It was a victory, but it was a bittersweet one. Mathers' conviction didn't erase the pain that Jasmine had suffered. It didn't undo the years of injustice that had allowed him to operate with impunity. The fallout from the case continued to reverberate through the Havenwood Police Department. Some officers resigned, disgusted by what had happened. Others doubled down, clinging to the old ways. Anthony worked tirelessly to rebuild the department, to weed out the bad apples, to promote officers who believed in justice and accountability. He instituted new training programs, emphasizing de-escalation techniques and community policing. He worked to build trust with the community, attending town hall meetings, listening to their concerns, responding to their needs. It was slow, painstaking work. But he was determined to transform the Havenwood Police Department into an organization that served and protected all of its citizens, not just some. Jasmine, meanwhile, became an advocate for police reform. She spoke at rallies, she testified before state legislators, she used her voice to demand change. She was angry, she was hurt, but she refused to be silenced. She channeled her pain into action, determined to make sure that what happened to her never happened to anyone else. The town of Havenwood began to change. It wasn't easy. There was resistance. There were setbacks, there were moments of despair. But the community was united in its desire for a better future. They elected new leaders who were committed to social justice. They passed new laws to protect civil rights. They invested in programs to address the root causes of crime. Slowly, gradually, Havenwood began to heal. Years passed. Anthony retired from the police force, but he remained active in the community, mentoring young people and advocating for reform. Jasmine graduated from college and became a lawyer. She dedicated her career to fighting for justice for the marginalized and oppressed. The town of Havenwood became a model for other communities, a symbol of hope and possibility. But the story of Jasmine Cole and Anthony Reed is not just a story about a town. It's a story about the power of love, the power of courage, and the power of one person to make a difference. It's a story about the long, hard fight for justice, a fight that is far from over. But it's a fight that is worth fighting. Because every act of courage, every voice raised in protest, every step taken towards justice, brings us closer to a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. And that, my friends, is a world worth fighting for.